And good morning, everybody. We're live. Congratulations. You made it through the week. Another fantastic week of awesome food safety, food quality, the best products in the world that we all enjoy and love every single day. But if you work in quality or in sanitation, a lot of times your work goes unheralded because people just expect it to function. But we know that's not the case. So today, Tim and I are here to say thanks. We really appreciate all that you do. If you're new to the Food Safety Chat, pull up a chair. My name is Bryan Armentrout, and I am with the Food Leadership Group. And every Friday at 8 a.m., 10 a.m. Eastern Time on LinkedIn and YouTube, we live stream and we have a conversation around food safety and quality topics. And that's a key point, I think, of what we do here. Is this is not a lecture. This is not Tim and I telling you what you have to do. This is meant to be a conversation. And today's a cool day too, because Tim has been one of those guys on the other end of the conversation, and today he's in the hot seat. So, I'm going to have some fun with Tim here today. But good morning, Tim Steffensmeier, Vice President of Sales at Pure Bioscience. How are you doing today, sir?
Good, Brian. How are you doing?
No, not too bad. Not too bad. It's kind of a gloomy day out here in Loveland, Colorado. But this time of year, that's to be expected. So today it's going to be in the 30s, and then tomorrow it's going to be back to the 50s and 60s in no time. So it's not that bad. I lived in Buffalo, New York for 5 years, and the winter, that's all it was, right? It was just gray skies the whole time, which gets very depressing. I think it's probably the best idea for that.
For sure.
So as everybody who's been on the chat, even once or twice, knows, Tim is a regular here on the chat, and he always has amazing input and content. And so really glad to have you on the chat here today, Tim.
Thanks, Brian. Yeah, I had to laugh real quick when you said it's going to be in the 30s. I'm like, well, we hit a low of like 36 in Tennessee last night, so I'm sorry.
And then you're in the Nashville area, right?
I am, yeah, but I was born and raised in Wisconsin, so I know what cold gray skies are. Then we lived in Minneapolis area for 15 years. We just lived here a year and a half now is all. So I know what you're saying. Cold gray skies, like, yes, it broke freezing today.
Well, the thing too is out west versus the east. So I lived in PA and upstate New York, back east, is the humidity level is so much less out here, is that the cold is not as cold. Because our family's from Iowa, and we'd go back in winter to go visit the family, and you would just be like, oh my God. And out here, you need a light coat at best. Buffalo, you need parka and the boots, and you need the whole 9 yards if you're in Buffalo.
For sure.
Look at all the amazing people filing in here. So we got Elena, good morning. Joseph, Morgan, good to see Morgan. Duncan is here, awesome. Larry's here too. Willie, so he's up from your neck of the woods. Willie's up in Minnesota. And Cheryl is here as well. Amazing, right? So it looked like what the SQF conference was this week. Looked like that was a very successful conference on LinkedIn. Lots of smiling faces of the people that I know who are at the conference. Too bad I couldn't go this year, but yeah, got to kind of pick and choose those type of things. Yep. So we got a ton to go here. So one of the things that we love to do here on the chat, Tim, is when we get started out is when there's a new guest is, kind of give everybody a little bit about you and your background and what this, what's this SDC thing up here on your profile?
SDC. Yeah. So that is silver dihydrogen citrate. And it's really what makes our company a company, quite frankly. And without getting into all the crazy science stuff, it really is a citric acid molecule that has a silver ion attached to it. And the food source, or the bacteria, I should say, sees the silver ion and the citric acid as a food source, and it eats it. And the silver ion is there to kill it from within. So kind of a Trojan horse type effect. So it's really exciting, really cool. I love innovation and technology. Coming from my sanitation background, I was always looking for better tools and better ways of doing my job and keeping it safer. And I found this technology and fell in love with it. And here I am.
Nice. And so as the vice president of sales at Pure Bioscience, other than traveling, it seems like every freaking week, what do you do with Pure Bioscience?
What do I do with my time? That's a great question, Brian. I talk to people like you. I just had a great call with Joseph Kramer yesterday. That was kind of fun to connect with him. But no, honestly, what I do is my goal is to help the industry, right? I've been there. I've been in the trenches. I grew up in the sanitation world and in food plants, and I know a lot of the challenges, right, that they face. And so my biggest goal is how do I help solve those problems, whether it's, through our team, we have a fantastic team here, or whether it is through a distributor partner, right? So kind of however we can, we go to help.
Nice. Well, and Duncan, I think, deserves a comment
Oh,
here as well.
there we go. Wah, wah, wah. Nicely done, sir.
Nice, nice. So, with that, number one, first, let's everyone please join Tim and I for a drink of your favorite beverage of choice.
Cheers.
Cheers. That's a cool mug. What's on your mug there?
That is a gift from actually shout out to Veronica Sanchez from Commercial Food Sanitation. So CFS and Interlocks, my last company, I was there for 12 years, was based out of New Orleans. And so she sent me a Christmas present this year with a New Orleans mug as a reminder of, hey, we miss you.
Nice. My favorite mug is my wife's a chemist, and then she was a pharmacist for a long time. And she has a periodic table mug. And
Nice.
that is an awesome mug. I'll have to bring her on the chat here one of these days.
You should.
Yeah, it is really cool. But I like my, I talked about this before. This is an Embra mug. This is one of those heated mugs.
You like that?
It's awesome. Yeah. But the charge will last about an hour or so. So
see, I drink my coffee in the first 15, 20 minutes typically, so it doesn't matter anyways. I'll keep a French press on my desk.
Ooh, fancy. That's right. You're a coffee connoisseur, aren't you?
I am a little bit. Not compared to some, but compared to some, yes.
And this also reminds me before we get to the dad joke here as well is so you had posted on your profile on LinkedIn here recently a quiz, and I didn't see the results actually, but you said, hey everybody, how do Bryan and I know each other? And then you listed out some different options. Are you ready to reveal the answer here to the chat?
I will dig it up while you're talking. How's that sound?
I'll kind of I'll do a little dancing here while you're looking.
I had so many posts, it can take me a minute to get to it, Bryan.
I kind of threw that at you. I didn't tell you about that. Sorry.
You did not. You didn't warn me. I will say, though, the answer, that is the real answer, is we've never met in person. I mean, this isn't really in person. I don't count, right? And we talk every week because literally every week I make the food safety chat a top priority of mine. So I'd say we talk every week from that perspective.
Yeah.
So, there's that.
Yeah, we probably know as much about each other as anybody else does who works together, right? And that's one of the cool things about the chat is making these friends, right? I mean, Duncan, he's over on the other side of the ocean. He's over in the UK. So we built this amazing community together for sure.
So you ready for the results?
Yes. What'd you get?
13% of people said we've worked together before. 60% said I've never met him in person. 0 fell for the we grew up in the same town gig. I'm not surprised in that. That was just a red herring. And then 27% said we connect weekly. And we had 55 votes.
Nice. So people were pretty much dead on.
Yeah.
Okay. So are you mentally prepared now? The dad joke. Okay, here we go. All right. Tim, what do a tick and the Eiffel Tower have in common?
Do I want to know?
They're both parasites.
Sometimes the worse the bad joke, the better in my mind. And that was a pretty bad one. So well done. Well done.
I particularly like that one. So my wife is my sounding board for which dad joke I pick for the week. And so if she doesn't laugh, then it's out. And so she got a good laugh out of that one. So it's like, all right, good.
Nice.
And you'd be surprised how many crappy dad jokes I have to get through to get the right dad joke. So let's dive into our topic first today, which is a fun one, right? It kind of gets into a theme that we've been having lately, which is our conversations go into 2 buckets, Tim. I always think about it as we have technical conversations and then we have people conversations. And this is kind of a hybrid of the two.
Favorite.
Yeah, with your massive experience in the industry, and as you had alluded to earlier, like me, you've been in the roles in production facilities, in companies, and actually doing these things. And that's super important. And the title of our chat for today is Programs Are Not the Same as Execution. And definitely in quality, this is, I think, a lesson that a lot of young professionals in the field have a hard time with, because they have this false belief that if I write something down and I create a procedure, the people are going to do it. And generally they find out that this is false when they have their first big audit, right?
Mhm.
So they think that they write a procedure and that, okay, well, here's what everybody needs to do. And you have to do this because I wrote it down. And people are like, yeah, whatever.
Mhm.
And
Or they
out
don't
comes the audit
understand that
pin.
because it wasn't written well, right? That's I mean, we can have a whole discussion on just that alone, in my opinion. But yeah, but there's a whole host of reasons it doesn't get followed.
Exactly. And it's frustrating because a lot of times you have a couple of paths that you can take at that point, Tim. You can say, okay, lesson learned. I need to change my approach. Or they'll say, I'm going to double down. I'm going to make this even more onerous and more demanding. And that is absolutely the wrong thing.
Yeah.
One of the lessons that I learned through this, and hopefully we can help people kind of short circuit that process so you don't do that, is that whenever I'm looking at writing a new process, a new procedure, work instruction, or whatever, the first thing I always do is I go out to the floor and let's say receiving. Receiving is a nice, easy example. And I work with the receivers and I say, okay, pretend I'm a new guy. Teach me how to receive. And
Mhm.
what I'm looking for is the overall process. And I'm in my mind, I'm creating a flow chart of the process.
Yep.
And what I'm looking for is points of decision.
Mhm.
So, okay, we bring in a truck and okay, well, does the truck have seals on the back? Yes, yes. All the trucks have to have seals. Okay, great. What if there's no seal?
Yep.
What do you do? And then I will document that process, putting in those steps of what do you do when things go wrong. Now, all of this is also predicated on proper training. And
Mhm.
as we were preparing for this, um, that relationship between a supervisor and his team, that's where everything happens. And I think it's an important theme for our talk today is that that's food safety culture.
Yep. Yep.
That is it right there. You don't have to make it complicated. You have to make it
Mhm.
fancy. It's making sure that your team understands what's required and that if something doesn't work, that they know to raise their hand. Austin talks about this, speak up culture
Mhm.
is,
Mhm.
hey boss, got a problem here, instead of just ignoring it and hoping it goes away. And
Yeah.
that's the root cause of almost 90% of our problems.
Mhm. No, I absolutely agree. Yeah, when I was at Kraft, actually, we had a little suggestion box. But in the suggestion box, if you put a suggestion in there, they required you to come up with at least a stab at a solution, right? And the goal
Right.
wasn't that the person on the floor was going to solve all the problems or even that management would make a change. But the goal was to try to train the team that if you see a problem, bring it to our attention, but then try to be part of the solution as well.
Yeah.
And it worked for a while and then didn't work so great. But I think the concept is spot on.
Yeah, and I refer to that as the hot potato, right?
Mhm.
If I find something, let's say that you're the quality manager and I'm somebody on the floor, and I come to you and say, hey Tim, we found this gasket and part of it's missing, and I give it to you and I walk away,
Yep.
right? I've just handed you my problem, and I'm
I
like,
will hunt you down.
done. I don't need to do anything else. I gave it to Tim.
Yep.
Wrong.
Very wrong. Very wrong. But that's a culture thing, quite frankly.
Yeah.
And I think honestly, Brian, that goes back to leadership, which again we could do, and you have had many great chats on already, right? But I mean, that alone, you could take that one example and say, let's break it down. Why this happened, what went wrong, how we fix it, right? Yada yada yada.
Mhm. Yeah, and you're just it's part of I think the nature of what we do is
Mhm.
that we're problem solvers, and if someone brings us a problem, right, rah, we want to jump on it.
Yep.
It's kind of like that saying of if your wife has a problem, she doesn't want you to fix the problem necessarily. She wants you to understand the problem and where she sees it. And that works both ways for both sexes, but that's kind of the
Mhm.
stereotypical view that you have is as we want to jump in and fix it. And a lot of times that's not the right approach.
Have you seen the? This is way off topic. I'm sorry, but I just gotta say it. Have you seen the YouTube bit on the nail in the wife's forehead?
Uh,
So check it out. Google YouTube nail and forehead, wife's forehead or something, and it'll come up. But basically, what it comes down to is all she wants is to have her husband listen to her and hear her, and all he wants to do is grab the nail and pull it out and fix the problem right now.
right.
So it's a great little bit.
So I think that's a lesson that definitely transfers over to us, right? Is sometimes just taking a breath and saying, okay, well, let's talk about this. What do you think we should do? Right. That
Yeah.
golden rules. And in a lot of ways, and so part of our theme here for today is, quality assurance, food safety, and sanitation. we're very tightly linked, and a lot of companies, the two groups report in together. And so for me, why is sanitation to you, as somebody who has a ton of experience in that area, why is it so important, and why is it overlooked?
Oof. Again, another 10 chats on that one. But in a nutshell, I was fortunate to have a business development manager. We called him a bum when I was at Kraft just starting out. And he was basically the plant manager, and that was my boss. And he had a saying that said that he always said, Tim, everyone knows that production ends with sanitation. I'm like, well, yeah, okay, we don't know that. You're right. He said, but what everyone doesn't realize or admit or think through is that sanitation is really the start of production. Production can't start without effective sanitation. And that stuck to me, right? And what I take that then is, look, production ends and begins with effective sanitation. And I think it's just so critical. Look, not almost all, but a good majority of, I would say, honestly, recalls. Could they have been prevented with proper sanitation and or hygienic design? Yeah, I think they probably could have, quite frankly, right? So, I mean, you look at it, and those hourly employees working third shift, the hot, the cold, the dangerous chemicals, the dangerous equipment, and dangerous environment all around them, they are really your frontline defense for not only just preventing, illnesses and deaths, but quite frankly, damaging your brand.
Mm-hmm. And I got such a good saying. I'm gonna put this here in the chat, right? Sanitation is the start of production, 100%. And I mean, if you think about it too, FDA recognizes this as well. Because if you have a food safety issue in your plant and FDA shows up, God forbid, that's the first thing they dive into, isn't it? Is sanitation. It's like, okay, well, we want to see your cleaning records. We want to see your allergen testing. We want to see your ATP results. We want to see your rework. Oh, they love rework. That's the easiest way, right? So I always refer to this as the bookends, right? Is if you have sanitation from a prior shift that jumps over the sanitation wall into that next production run. So to your point, you don't have a start of production if you're doing that. You just have one gigantic continuous production run. And when you see a recall that happens, and then a week or so later, FDA announces that the recall's been expanded, 9 times out of 10, it's because of rework and issues in sanitation.
Yeah, absolutely.
So here's a super broad question, right? So we can take this in a million different ways, but let's kind of think about this too. Is what makes for, and I think the key word here is effective. What makes for an effective sanitation program?
Well, I think the stereotypical canned answer is going to be, you got to have the right SSOPs or procedures, the right tools, the right chemicals, all those things. And those things are absolutely freaking critical. But the problem, Joseph, I know it's deja vu from last night. Thank you, bud. But the problem, quite frankly, in my mind, Bryan, is there's not enough leadership. There's not enough ownership, right, on the floor. And you brought up and hit the nail on the head earlier, that supervisor, right, is critical to working with the team, not be the taskmaster, but to work with the team to help them understand why their job is important. I think that's the first really honestly piece of it. Like, when I would look at my team, like, why do we do what we do? Well, I don't know, get a paycheck. I like doing this. I like doing that. I don't like doing other things, right? That's not why we do it. When you're in sanitation, you do what you do to protect the people eating your food, which, by the way, probably is your own family members.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That was a saying I used to use. I'm sure people on the chat have heard me say this before, is if you don't feel confident in taking a piece of food off of that line, taking it home, and immediately feeding it to your grandchildren, I want to know.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Paul makes a great point. Senior management commitment, it has to be present. And when I was in the role, I was technically a lead, which was like a supervisor, but I also reported right to the plant, director, right? So I really was overseeing the entire department. And even though I was kind of that manager, so to speak, I would bring in my FSQA manager, director, once every 3 months at minimum on third shift. He hated me for that. But in order to be able to sit there and do a pre-op, look at what the team had going on and everything else. But the biggest piece in my mind, just show that support, right? Because too often third shift sanitation is an island, so to speak, right? Where wild, wild west in some cases. And I want them to know that someone's watching, but someone also has your back besides just, me, myself, and I.
Yeah. Well, and this goes back to those old sayings of, you can document doing something wrong and everybody's following that, but it's still wrong.
Yep.
And you need to make sure, and this is where I think a lot of companies struggle, is the whole verification and validation piece of this is, how do you know, right? And this is one of the things, right? FDA is going to hit you right between the eyes with is, okay, fine, we see your CIP cycles. How do you know that that's effective? Right. And they have no evidence, right? This all comes back to Plan, Do, Check, Act, right?
Yeah. Bryan, I hit the button, the CIP, that's all it does. It just does everything for me. We're good.
Yeah, we're fine. And I mean, there was a large recall in California here a couple of years ago with a beverage manufacturer for those same reasons, right? Is that technology is limited, and you're the boss of the technology, not the other way around. So how do you know that your RTD thermometers are reading correctly? How do you know that your flow rates are what you think that they are? How do you know all of these parameters within there, even stupid things, right? And the pens on your chart, right, that are going back and forth. When's the last time those things were verified to make sure that your chart recorders are working correctly? And getting that verification piece down is really hard. And I would imagine too, a lot of times in the sanitation field, people don't really understand how those chemicals work, how it impacts their plant directly, and what are the right chemicals for them. Because a big chunk of this is that work associated with that. And people think that they need to recreate that whole thing, and they really don't from a chemical side, do they?
Right. Yeah. And I apologize. I froze for a moment in case you couldn't tell.
No, you looked exactly the same.
Oh boy.
Just kidding.
Stuck.
So we were just talking about verification and validation, and a lot of times how that just absolutely stumps plants. That simple question of, okay, I pushed the button, I ran the CIP, and FDA says, okay, great. How do you know that that's effective? So what are some of the tools that you used for that process? Oh, a little bit of freeze again. It's always, so one of the things with technology, right, is you just keep going. So, hey, there you are.
Right,
so verification, validation. I just thought you were thinking very deeply.
Very deeply. Let's see here. All these gray hairs are cranking high speed here. No, I mean, verification, validation. I mean, just to really briefly touch on that again, that's on the topic in itself, right? I hope you're writing this down and start having people in these chats to fill in all these blanks, Bryan. And another great comment, CIP, right? Yeah, that could be a whole conversation. But really, really quick, right? I mean, you validate something as I see it, and I'm a sanitation guy, so of all the FSQA quality people correct me, I'm sure on this one, but you got to validate, right, initially. And usually that's using micro data and other things as well. But then you're verifying it on a daily basis, right? So I verified my sanitation equipment was cleaned on a daily basis, right? We used swabs and we sent them into the lab and they came back results a few days later, and someone did, immediate results and the ATPs and things. But you have to verify what you're doing works, because just because you validate it at one point in time doesn't mean that it's being executed. There we go again, right? Properly every day.
Well, and part of this too, right, is especially on the verification side of things, is people are like, if you're using something like ATP, let's say for an example, well, what's your ATP standards? Well, we want 0. Well, that's stupid, because it's going to vary by surface. A chain link belt running through a piece of equipment is going to have a very different tolerance threshold level associated with that versus stainless steel. And anybody who's looked at stainless steel surfaces under a microscope understands that's not what you think it is either, right? Pits and grooves, and if you're using bad chemicals that are pitting, all these type of things need to be taken into account. And setting those action limits and saying, all right, from a green, yellow, red standpoint, okay, here's our target, we want to be below. All right, within this range, I'm kind of worried. And then red, no, this failed. We need to reclean. And those need to
what does reclean look like? Just spray it with water or truly reclean? And in my book is no, you got to reclean. That's what I said, not re-rinse, right?
Yeah, exactly. And don't forget too the benefits of actually using your eyes and your nose, right? Using your senses.
Mhm.
They can tell you a
Absolutely.
lot. It kind of goes back to that boar's head example that we've seen out in the industry where they had, equipment that was being cleaned properly and they're finding all kinds of nasty stuff. And people who would walk in that room would go, ooh, ooh, ooh. What?
Yeah.
That's not ooh. What's that smell? Right? That's telling you a ton right there.
I know I have developed a sniffer, right?
Yeah.
And the other thing I'll say is in order to smell things sometimes, literally you get on your hands and knees and go smell under a piece of equipment because you might
Yeah.
not smell it walking through the room, right? You
Mhm.
open something up, what does it smell like, right? And that's just I can't stress that enough how important that piece is.
Yes. And I had just a superstar QC lab personnel who would work in one of my companies in the past on the night shift. And she would work with the sanitation crew,
Hmm.
help them out in the plant, keep an eye on things. And then at the end of the shift in the morning, which unfortunately, right, sanitation often gets shoved to third shift, which it
Yep.
doesn't have to be. She would do an inspection. And her inspection wasn't just, oh, that looks pretty good. She would walk around and randomly tell the sanitation crew, and the supervisor would go around with her. And then she would say, open up that pump head. I want to see the lobes.
Hmm.
And they would tear it apart. And
Good.
she would do an inspection and swab inside the equipment because she knew where the devils were hiding.
Yeah, I mean, you have to. I mean, tear down, whether it's daily or on a certain set schedule on your MSS or both, on my strong opinion, right? Has to happen. Has to happen. I mean, I told you, I think Brian, I've told quite a few people too. I thought when I was at Kraft, I was going to get fired because we went from 64% passing rate on our clean equipment swabs to 98 about several months after I took over, and the team was doing fantastic. I was feeling pretty good. I was younger and dumber, the ers in there by the way, than I am now. And I was pretty proud of everything. I slept pretty good at night, right? And then they had corporate come through and do a teardown. This is back in '06, so a lot, long time ago. And no one really was doing equipment teardown at that time. And I had great equipment swab results, like I said, but we started tearing it apart. And those
Mhm.
sandwich joints, the niches, and everything else, to your point, Brian, it was scary. And you think about it, those things leach out, right? Those zone twos that leach out into zone ones, food contact surfaces during the production cycles, machines shake and food goes through it. That is putting you at serious risk. And I honestly thought I was gonna get fired because, like, holy crap, I wasn't doing my job, right? And thankfully I
Yeah.
didn't. It was a learning experience for all of us. But you've got to tear the equipment down. You got to see what's going on behind the scenes, or you put yourself at such high risk.
Yeah, and that's where like quality, sanitation, maintenance, there's cumulative risk that piles
Mhm.
up over time.
Mhm.
There's the seals in the pump that don't get changed out when they should. There's the gaskets that don't get changed, et cetera, et cetera. And it just kind of builds up over time and you don't see it. Then all of a sudden it explodes and you have a massive crisis. And I think this is probably pretty common. I'd be curious to see what other people thinks in the comments. Is we all kind of have in our careers, I think, early on, a kind of a come to Jesus moment
Yep.
where we follow.
The
Like,
line.
oh yeah,
Yep.
we're kicking butt. We know what we're doing, and then somebody comes in and shows us the error of our ways,
Mhm.
and you're like, oh, okay, right.
Yeah.
And back for me, one of my early experiences, and this goes back to Kraft as well, is there was a gentleman from Kraft who was retired and he was now an auditor. He wrote Kraft's HACCP plan.
Wow.
And so
Nice.
there's like, I'm sure you've seen it. I know I still have it. There was a
Oh,
book.
yeah, that's a good paperweight.
Yeah, the book. And so he was my auditor. And oh my goodness, he
I'm
tore me
sorry.
apart. Absolutely tore. But I learned so much from that.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
much. And I'm grateful for the experience. He taught me so much. And so those experiences, I think, in our careers are super important.
But Brian,
But
is what you well, sorry, real quick though, Brian, that is what you did with that is what
yeah,
mattered, right? Because you could have packed it up. I could have packed it up. I could have gotten fired, or technically, probably, right? Maybe
right.
you could, I don't know, or not, but it's the information, it's how we present it to people, and it's what they do with it that matters. And
Mm,
that's why I think you and I are still here today, because that just fueled our fire to get better, dig down, dig deeper, and learn more and see what now can we do to prevent a bad audit, to prevent bad equipment swabs once you tear it apart, right? That
yeah.
that I think is the critical culture piece that leaders have to have, and leaders need to impart upon their teams.
Mhm. And I think, looking back, and I know this is, we both had, large teams of people who work for us. Those are the things that we look for as leaders. Who are the people that step up and say, oh crap, I just had my butt handed to me. I've learned a lot from this. I'm going to be better because of it. Good. Nobody expects perfection. We expect learning.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Joseph brings up a great point here. The fundamentals, I go back to the 7 steps as I was taught, right? But scrubbing, that mechanical action piece, there is no substitute for that, period. You can't just spray and pray.
Nope. And this gets back to the other piece of kind of our hybrid conversation here, which is the people side of things. And all right, sanitation has got to be one of the toughest jobs to hire for. I mean, you're more than likely working in the middle of the night. You're working in hot, wet, cold, just chemicals. You're wearing all kinds of PPE all the time.
That means you trip over stuff because they get fogged up half the time, right?
Yeah. And finding those people who are like, yeah, this is important and I enjoy doing this versus nope. Right. And so as a result of that, if you don't manage your hiring process properly, you can have just turnover through the roof. So what did the hiring process look for you? What did that look like for you, Tim? What did you find made a good person to work on sanitation?
Oh, man, that is a loaded question, Brian, because I don't think there's a one size fits all answer. There's several things. So when I was, again, going back to craft, I hadn't inherited my large crew, right? And I was able to hire a few new ones, but that was more so done by corporate HR and the plant HR and goofy things like that, right? But when I left and we came to a small snack food company, I was actually required to start a sanitation team, which that's a whole nother story. Running business and allergens for 40 years and no sanitation department, that's crazy. But when I put an ad out, as they would say, right, when I was looking for a team, I was looking for obviously able-bodied people. That you got to have able-bodied people. Obviously, everyone knows, check that box. Okay, good. But there's a lot of able-bodied people out there, right? So are they willing, right? So let's just be honest and brutally honest with them, what they're going to face. If they've never done it before, I would honestly give them the opportunity to come on shift and watch the process, suit up and watch the process with me, right? And there's 2 people that took me up on it. One said, this is not for me in 2 minutes. And the other guy, he stayed. He was actually one of my better employees for a while there. But I think that's critical, is just understanding someone who is committed, right? And again, like I said earlier, it's not about just, spray and pray. It's about truly why I'm here. I'm here to do a job to protect my family, everyone's families that's eating the product, right? And the brand at the end of the day as well, right? I think that's really critical for someone to understand that. Now, I understand you're usually hiring hourly employees that, aren't making great wages and aren't maybe the most educated and everything else, but anyone can understand that, right? Anyone can have that as their passion or really the reason for doing what they do.
Yeah. Well, and you made a really good point there. I want to make sure and emphasize this, is that it is one of the key lessons that we've learned as managers of people is don't compromise.
Yeah.
Right? If you're interviewing someone and you think they may be okay if you work with them and hold their hand and stuff like that, no, pass.
Yeah.
Wait for that person. So like in your example, okay, hey, and I'd love that example. This is a really good thing for people to do, is tell you what, come work with me tomorrow. Let's see what you think. Let's see what you think of it. And if you're standing next to you, Tim, like this.
Right. Well, they can't figure out how to put their PPE on. They're like, this jacket, I got to wear this thing. Are you kidding me? It's hot already, right? Like, well, I understand. You're absolutely right. Go flip burgers at McDonald's. You'll make more money, right? I mean, and that's the sad part too, Brian. The thing is that in too many cases, we don't pay our sanitation people enough, right? Yeah. When I was at the same snack food company, I was able, thankfully, to get the owner to take the wages he initially was going to be paying them, which was minimum wage, which an hourly line worker who literally washed packages all day long, horrible job, but anyone can kind of do it, right? He was going to pay the same wage. I'm like, you can't. So we were able to bump them up to machine operator pay at the high end of the operator pay, because I was able to convince him how critical these folks really were. And I think that's the other piece too. Too many times leadership overlooks that part of it right there. And sanitation is seen as a cost center. That's all it is in too many cases, right? So yeah, if you can bring that hourly wage down by a few dollars an hour times 10, 20, 40, whatever employees, That's a lot of savings at the end of the year. Is it worth it? And my answer is absolutely not.
Right, because now you're getting into the hidden costs. Because if you have a 30% turnover rate and you as the manager are constantly training new people and trying to keep your shift organized and keeping those key people who are leading in place, and they're leaving at the next job that pays a buck more, you've wasted all that time. It's
Yep.
better to pay a wage that's going to keep them motivated for that role than trying to just continuously replace people. And that's just bad management for that.
Absolutely.
See, Esther had a question for you. Wow, the comments are flying, guys. I love this. Keep it up. So Esther wanted to know here is how's this all play to dry products? You guys are talking about all this wet stuff. What about the dry products? Any insights for her?
Oh wow, that's a hard one.
Oh.
Dry cleaning is by far the hardest. When I was at Commercial Food Sanitation, we were starting to launch a cleaning training program down in New Orleans, which highly recommend, by the way, Sanitation Essentials training. I was put in charge of creating the dry cleaning workshop, and I'm like, this is crazy. The wet shop I could do all day long. The dry is hard. And what I learned through that process, so quite frankly, and when I was at the snack food company before that, really was around dry cleaning doesn't always mean, keyword always, doesn't always mean no water, no chemicals. It means limited, right? And you really got to take a look at your hygienic design of your equipment and your infrastructure, as well as your products coming in and out. But in some cases, you maybe take something out of the room and wet clean it, dry it off, and bring it back in, right? There's a whole lot of things, again, a whole nother chat we can do. And Esther, we can chat online if you want about that as well, because that can be an absolute nightmare. But sometimes things as simple as if you can remove your belts and clean them somewhere else and bring it back, or other little tidbits there, really make a big difference.
Yeah. And yeah, people are chiming in here. Yeah, dry sanitation, huge challenge. And part of the challenge with this as well is dry sanitation increases risk because in most cases, your window of cleaning is longer. So let's say you're working in a flour mill and you have your dryer and all this pieces of, you're maybe tearing that stuff down once a month, once a quarter. So if you find something bad, all of your product during that period of time is potentially suspect.
And don't even start on allergens. And now with the seeds being sesame, I mean, it's just it gets nuts. I will say real quick, there are tools. It was brought up here in the chat as well, right? There's tools now, thankfully, that are better. Compressed air is probably your worst enemy, right? Vacuums are fantastic. They make a good way, actually. It makes a really good hygienic zone 1 food contact surface, dedicated, by the way, folks, please, right, for food contact surface. But having those tools makes a huge difference.
Yeah. And designed for the purpose. Do not go down to Home Depot and buy a shop vac.
No, spend the money, buy a good one.
Yeah, because really all you're doing, right, Tim, is you're just creating this giant cloud producer.
Especially when you're dealing with allergens, you're screwed.
Absolutely. So so was there a mechanism for hiring? Was there something that you found that was a good way to find good people for what you were looking for?
Well, hourly sanitation employees, unfortunately, or fortunately, however you look at it, the best way was to recruit them off the floor from operations. I mean, I'm not gonna lie, I did, an okay job at that, but I tried to go after line operators that I knew, right, built a relationship with. As you're ending the day of sanitation, they're coming in, you can observe the line operators and start to see who's methodical, who cares about their job, right, looking at their OEE and what they're doing and how well they know the equipment. And that was the other best part. If you hire a line operator, in many cases, they kind of knew how the equipment ran and what it sounded like, how to take it apart in some cases, or put it back together. So you already had part of your job done for you in the training. So that was kind of the hourly side of it. When it comes, though, to, I'm going to say supervisors or managers or whatever, this is just, I've had quite a few conversations the last 2 weeks on this with many people now. And, it comes down to networking. It comes down to who you know, or someone that knows someone, right? Bryan, you've had people talk about this. I mean, that's so critical because you can trust them, right? Looking at a piece of paper is one thing, reading a resume is one thing, but I should say, hey, Bryan, I got this guy, Joe. He wants to work for me, or I'm looking at him, or hey, Bryan, someone? I got this opening here, and here's what I want. And I know Bryan knows what I need because he has the same culture mindset I do. Yeah. And that then is a huge step in the right direction, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And part of this too, I think there's an important lesson there is that in order to help people be retained in a company and see a career path forward, is it's okay if they change departments, right? If anything, that's a great thing.
Very good thing.
A future plant manager, she needs to understand everything in that plant and how everything works, because everybody's there for a reason, right? There's no department. There's a reason why every production facility has the same departments, because everything is needed. And the plant manager's job is to have an understanding of how all those things fit together. And so if you have somebody who starts in production, who then moves to sanitation, who goes to quality, who then goes to procurement or whatever, that's going to make a highly valued employee, because the more you can show them the big picture, the better off they are.
And everyone's going to want them as their leader, right? If they're doing a good job. If they try to skate by, they don't, because then they can't cut corners. But I mean, everyone wants them as that leader. And that's why when I started in sanitation, I'll be honest, my goal was never to be in sanitation. I'd be like, when I grow up someday, I want to be a sanitation employee. I never did that. Never even know what it was. Even when I worked at I'm going to go back to my craft plant, right? I thought literally when I was in production, they come in at night, they sprinkle some water on equipment, they make it look clean, smell like bleach. And, we come in the morning and we're good to go, right? So when I was asked to take over the department, I honestly had somewhat of that mindset, right? But what I found quickly is when I dug into it, so even though I oversaw the department, I would suit up. I would go out there. I would tear things apart. I would clean things. I would dig, into what we had going on, because quite frankly, I didn't want my team to pull one over on me, right? I wanted to know that equipment, that job, as good or better than the gal who had been doing it for 20 years, she was a rock star. So I had her teach me, right? And that was, I thought, really important.
Ooh, good point. Yeah, so that training program is essential, because part of it is people are people. So if I'm working for you, Tim, as a sanitation employee, and you're my boss, there's certain things I like to clean, and there's certain things that really suck to clean, right? They're difficult to tear apart. I have to crawl around on the floor. I'm like, I don't want to do that. And as the manager, you need to understand that. And those are the things that you then inspect to make sure that they got done.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And I knew those hot spots, right? And those hard to reach areas. And again, you can smell sometimes, right? Which is really helpful. But and I mean, and on that topic, when we would come to pre-op, right, I would have my employees check each other's work.
Yeah.
And there was nothing more fun than watching the employees try to ding their buddy on the other side of that line, right? I mean, it was a blast, right? And like, oh, I got him, I got you. And, and again, Bonnie, go back to Bonnie, she had 20 years experience, and she knew every piece. Like, I would go to her and say, Bonnie, where's my biggest risk? Or go to maintenance. That's even better yet. Go to maintenance department and say, hey, Mr. Maintenance guy who is old and crusty and grumpy, right? Where does sanitation fail? And he will give you a list, right? He will say, when I tear this apart, it's clean, or it's not clean, it's dirty, it's crusty, it's whatever. And they're like, great, I appreciate that. Thank you. Here's your cup of coffee. I'm going to buy it the next week, right? Because that really helps me out, know where my risk is, and communicate that to the team.
Yep. I want to reemphasize that, because this is something I always did, is that if I had a problem I needed to investigate, foreign material, micro failure on finished product, whatever, I always went to two groups. The first group was sanitation, and the next one was maintenance. Always. And I would find the answers 9 times out of 10 for the problem with those groups.
And maybe 10 more problems, but you still find the answers.
I remember early in my career finding out from the maintenance crew that they had the ability to remotely monitor equipment. At the time, it was Wonderware, and it's been bought out by somebody else now. But I could go into the maintenance system and the equipment processing logs and see when pumps turned on and off, and temperatures in the lines, and all these type of things. And I could find those problems pretty quickly. But until the maintenance team taught me how to do that, I didn't even know about it.
Yeah. No, so important.
Yep. So definitely fun. Yeah. Anytime in any department, if you can figure out ways to build in competition and bonding, proper, right, competition, right? Because if you've got two guys on your team, that don't like each other, right, that can degrade pretty quickly.
I think a great way, though, this might be a good segue, Brian. We want to talk briefly on this too, is how do we celebrate those wins, right? And, it's a great comment here, because that competition can be celebrating wins in a point as well. I mean, I always heard if you aim at nothing, you hit it every time, right? So how do you know, what are your goals? What are your KPIs? What are your targets? But what a lot of plants I'm starting to see have done too, when we used to do, is actually my boss, he told me we should. I didn't like it at the beginning, to be honest, but then it made a lot of sense. We posted our clean equipment swab results, right? We posted our MSS schedule completion, right? We would post specific things where the plant, not just my team in a little sanitation closet hiding somewhere, right? But the plant, because we actually post them in the break room, to be honest. And what that did was that someone drove competition. We didn't put people's names attached to it. Didn't want to do that, right? But we would put what line, and people could pretty quickly, as a smaller plant, figure out who cleaned what when, right?
Yeah.
But it really helped. It was a healthy, friendly competition celebrating the win piece.
Yeah, and it could be, it's like, okay, guys, if we hit our ATP compliance numbers for the quarter, I'm giving you guys a nice bonus.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Another key point of that as well is, and if you're on sanitation, to your point earlier, Tim, you're on third shift and people don't see you. And the other department's like, what do? They just spray a bunch of foam around. And man, what an easy job the sanitation guys have. This is a way for you as the manager to help promote your team, right?
Yeah,
and so now on that board outside of the change room, all those KPIs for the sanitation are being posted, and the rest of the team can see those and go, oh, awesome. Look at all the stuff they're doing. That's part of your job as a manager, is to promote your team and make sure everybody understands the good jobs that they're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's so critical.
Yep. So like Duncan says here, right, is finding fun ways, gamification, right? What are fun ways to bring this information forward? I had a previous plant manager in one of my companies who was just a fantastic leader. And he made a bet with the plant that if they hit in that quarter, hit their production goals and some other different metrics, that he would run through the plant in a Batman suit.
I love it. I've heard of people doing that. And did he do it? He did it. Yeah, see? Look at that motivation. Let's go.
Yeah, and it was on a weekend, and production wasn't running if people were thinking those things. But the people in that plant talked about that for years after that.
Yeah, well, we used to have a sanitation celebration day once a year, and we put our plant manager in the dunk tank. That was fun. So that was the blast. She was a good sport. She would sit up in the dunk tank, and those who never were athletic a day in their life suddenly learn how to throw a softball to hit that little target to dunk the plant manager. It was like, that was the best ever, right? I mean, but what it did was it gained rapport, right? Yeah, she got soaking wet. She probably had vertigo by the time she went up and down all day long, right? But I mean, it was such a really cool event, and really great for senior leadership to be out there rubbing shoulders. So many times they go, they sit in their office, they don't know what I do. And you know what? She heard them. She listened to them. She heard their stories, their complaints, and addressed it and gave them an opportunity to literally dunk her in a dunk tank. I mean, it was fantastic.
Absolutely. And I mean, that kind of gets back to more of this people side of, and we're talking about training and building that team. It's really important in quality. I think it's even more so in sanitation to explain the why of why you're doing things. So if you're a supervisor and you're training a new operator on how to clean a heater head on a filler, okay, guys, here's how we do it. Here's how we take it out. Here's why this is so important. Because if these little heating elements aren't clean, that means it's not going to get through the bag properly. It's not going to seal it. And that means we're going to have mold complaints. And in about 3 to 4 weeks, when this product is out in the marketplace, our complaints are going to do this. And guess what? That is then our fault if that happens. So let's make sure to clean those correctly. Here's how you do it.
Yeah, I mean, the why. Wow, I think that in life in general, that's important, right? I mean, you don't always get the luxury of, in the heat of the moment, saying why, but anytime you possibly can, or especially if you make a change, oh my gosh, sit them down, right, and say, look, here's what we're going to be changing towards, here's what we're going to be doing, and here's why. What questions do we have? Go, right? But I mean, that's just so important. And you get their buy-in without even forcing it down their throat, so to speak, right?
Yeah. And this gets into, and you just said something that's super important that I want to make sure that we get to here in our chat here this morning, is change management. Right? So quality, sanitation, maintenance, all these type of groups. So there's nothing worse than walking into a plant on a Monday morning and there's a brand new piece of equipment sitting on the floor that nobody told you about. The engineering guys bought it off of a used equipment site, and they're super excited because it was super cheap. And you look at it and you're like, yeah, I know why it's cheap. And then the plant manager's like, make it work. that's a bad spot to be in.
It's a horrible spot to be in. I mean, I was, again, going back to my craft days. In craft, I thought did a really good job on gates and checklists, and you couldn't do certain things. And I walked into a plant one day. I knew there was going to be a platform put on my line 3 filler where the people stood, right? Excuse me. And anyways, I walked in, and we had this all done. We had meetings, the whole 9 yards. And yeah, we got to make sure it's cleanable, and here's what's approved. And we did a really great job as a team of prepping for this, right? But I walked in, and my guy, Sean, he comes to me and goes, well, I won't say what he said because on the chat here, but he had a few choice words to explain to me in a nutshell that he couldn't clean the drain. I'm like, okay, well, what's wrong? He brought me over. They put a grate over top of the drain, which whatever. It's, they're 12 inches wide by 36 inches long, right? Stainless steel grates. You simply pick them up, spray out the bottom as well to clean the bottom because people's boots get crap. They had holes in them, right? Underneath it every night. Yeah. Guess what? They welded the freaking grates to the frame. And so it wasn't but 5 minutes later, maintenance was tied up. I went back to the maintenance shop. I grabbed a grinder, and I literally took the angle grinder and I cut that grate open. Now, the rest of them had to be cut open so we can clean them effectively too. But that drain had to get cleaned and had to get cleaned now, right? Production wasn't running. Everything, we were good to go. Me doing that. But my point is, without the proper change management place, even though we thought we did, someone still did something they shouldn't have done, which causes pretty significant disruption on the sanitation and food safety side of things.
Yep. And yeah, there's, right. So obviously the sanitation team needs to be very involved in the food safety management in the plant. Anytime there's a change, right? That's the cornerstone of HACCP and your food safety plan is anytime there's a change, it needs to be reevaluated. And a lot of times that gets skipped over. The other key thing I always look at when I go to plants is areas that don't get cleaned. So for example, in the production areas, you know this well, Tim, what happens with control panels when it comes time for sanitation?
Oh boy.
Right.
Hopefully you cover them, and hopefully you uncover them and clean them.
And that second point rarely gets done. Yep. And for me, a good indicator of how well the plants were doing that, and this is probably just a function of me being tall, is I would love to go around and touch the tops of panels and electrical junction boxes and these, because those things are just massive collectors for clamps and gaskets and tools and God knows what. And if there's a bunch of stuff up there and there's a bunch of dust, I'm like, oh, okay, these are not getting cleaned. And pro tip for everybody is those zone 2 surfaces are one of the first things that FDA will sample if they're in your plant doing a swabathon.
Yeah. And hopefully you're already doing it yourself, right? On the zone 2. Another pro tip, everyone's got a cell phone, right? Take your cell phone if you're short like I am and not tall like Bryan. You can just touch them. You take it and you can literally run it along the top in video form, and you can see everything that's up there as you're walking along. Nice.
Good one. That is a good one. So Cheryl has a question here. Looking at ATP, is there a direct correlation to microbial? No, never know, right? They've tried for decades to say that there's a correlation. There is not. What you can do is you can say, based upon the cleaning of that particular surface, here's the base levels that I'm looking for. And you can say clean or not clean based upon those results, but you can never say that this RLU reading on the meter means this amount of bacteria. Thoughts, Tim?
That's a hot button topic. I agree with you, Bryan, and other people would disagree with you. So there's that.
Yeah, well, they're wrong.
I would agree, but I've been taken to task by folks on that one as well. But yeah, I think that ATP is a very quick snapshot of is it clean or not, but you're not telling you it's never a replacement for cleaning equipment swabbing whatsoever.
Yep. And see, as we're kind of getting a little bit here short on time, I wanted to get this in as well, because this is coming up here as well, is dry ice and other type of things. New different technology in sanitation. What are some things out there, Tim, that you're really excited about in the world of sanitation?
So I think a couple of my favorite things, honestly, is indicator tools, right? So there's indicator gels out there that are fantastic. There's indicator cameras out there. And by the way, these are never foolproof whatsoever, so don't pretend like they are. But it's a good indicator. I mean, you have indicator swabs even, right? We've had those for years, but you use those. Use all those tools to your advantage. I already mentioned, like Goodway's making a great vacuum, right? Fantastic. Other companies make them as well, but dedicated. These are these are companies out there that are really trying to find innovative ways to make our job as sanitation employees easier and more effective. And just to kind of round it out, I mean, the reason I'm at Pure Bioscience isn't because I'm VP of sales. I started off as technical director and some other things too, but it's honestly because when they came to me to hire me, I kind of laughed and said, I don't really know much about technology. It's snake oil, et cetera. I'm not interested. I dug into it and I discovered that, man, I wish when I was a sanitation manager, I had this SDC technology because it is so safe, right? There's no PPE required by label. It's 30 to 120 second, no rinse disinfection kills, ready to use. I mean, so many things that I struggle with on a day-to-day basis. Does it solve all the problems of the world? Absolutely not. Nothing that I mentioned does. Okay. And that's the key piece here I want to just leave everybody with, is that there's a lot of great technology out there. There's innovative tools out there. People are continually asking for, looking for. I get asked this on a weekly basis. Where can I go for X, right? But one thing will not solve all your problems. Dry ice. That is a phenomenal tool in the right application, right? So you need a toolbox, right? I'm not going to go hang a picture frame with a screwdriver. I'm going to pull a hammer out of the toolbox, right? I might grab a screwdriver to tighten the screws on the hanger on the picture frame, but not one tool besides a Swiss Army knife is going to do everything for you. So you need to understand and be researching and networking and talking with people. What is out there, whether it's chemistry, whether it's equipment, whether it's PPE, whatever the case is, training tools. There's so many great things. Get out there, get connected, ask people, understand. And when you know something works great, share it, please, because we all want the best for ourselves when we're eating food. That's the bottom line, right? We're doing this because I eat food, you eat food, Bryan. Everyone, all these people on the chat eat the food. Our kids do, our grandmas do. We want to keep it as safe as possible.
Yep, absolutely. And so part of this as well, so from my perspective, is new tools that are coming out. So a way to think about it that I'm looking at is what are some sources of massive data that we have in our plant? So for example, our ATP test results.
Yeah.
Can you now start using AI tools to analyze those giant piles of data that we collect and actually turn that into actionable information? So let's say, for example, you throw all of your ATP data into an AI program and you start noticing trends. It's like, oh, we tend to have more failures in sanitation around the holidays. Oh, really? I wonder why, right? And so that's an important part of being a manager is kind of going, why did that happen? Right?
Yeah, tracking and trending only does so much, or collecting that data only does so much if you're not truly tracking and trending. And then to your point, take it a step further. Now what do you do with it, right? And that's the scary thing about data is it can be damning, right? Because once you collect it, you got to do something with it.
Yep. Plan, do, check. And the last one, act. So as we're kind of summarizing our chat here, and so Tim, one of the things that I promised to you is this hour flies by, correct?
It does. You are absolutely right. I kept looking at the times to see the chats. I'm like, man, it's gone.
Yeah, exactly. So what are some key thoughts from our conversation here today on programs and execution and people and sanitation in general? What would you like to leave people with?
Oh, that wasn't on the notes, Bryan. Come on, man. I think that the biggest piece is, honestly, it goes back to leadership, really, right? Because without the proper leadership, you won't have proper training. You won't hold people accountable. You won't be looking for those new innovative tools and technologies out there. And you're probably going to get stuck with, here's my program. Here you go, Mr. and Mrs. Auditor. I checked the boxes. We're good to go. When in all reality, without the proper leadership, boots on the ground, boots on the floor, get the sanitation leadership team, quality, food safety, plant management, et cetera, on the floor some frequency. So support it, to check up on it, and help drive that continuous improvement.
Yep. And it goes back to one of the comments that was made earlier, is that management commitment, right? If you're not given the tools and the people to do your job correctly, well, guess what? If I'm in that role as a sanitation manager and my hands have been tied behind my back and I have limited resources, I'm going to do the best I can. And I'm probably more worried about getting fired at that point than anything else, right? Because everything is dirty, nothing's getting cleaned. And it's not my fault. It's because management hasn't given me the tools. Now that's also a two-way street.
It is a two-way street.
I need to speak up and say, hey, listen, I can't do with what you're giving me. So don't feel like you can just throw your hands up and that's an excuse, because it's not.
Yeah, for sure. Yep.
Well,
Extremely.
man, yep. So that's the end of our chat here for today. And wow, these comments, guys, thank you. This is just amazing. I am so proud, Tim, of the community of people that we brought together here to talk about these things, because to your point, and it's a valid one, is we're all in this together. And sanitation and quality and food safety and all these programs, there's no competition in that. We're all eating food, like you said, and we all depend on these activities. And this is a good point, I think, too, to say again, like we do at the beginning. Thanks, everybody. We really appreciate all you do. We know how difficult it is, and we're really glad that you're there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So with that, guys, we're going to bring our chat to a close for this week. Thank you, Tim. This is your first time on the chat. You did an amazing job.
Thank you.
And thank you to everybody for being here as well. We recognize, as Tim mentioned here as well, that an hour a week is a significant investment. You're here, you're learning, you're growing, we're sharing information, you're teaching us things, and I love it. So enjoy the weekend, right? Have a good time and know that you've done a great job. And we'll do it again here all next week as well. So we'll be back here, of course, on the chat next Friday at the same time, 8 a.m. Mountain Time, 10 a.m. Eastern on LinkedIn and YouTube, where I'll bring another food safety sanitation expert like Tim onto the show, and we'll have another great chat. But in the meantime, have a great time, enjoy yourselves, and we'll see you then. Thanks, Tim.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks.